Delta variant is making COVID-19 spread faster and more easily. Variants can be more contagious, aggressive, and deadly. But we know vaccines work. Vaccinated Californians have greater protection against serious illness, hospitalization, and death. We can help stop the spread and end this pandemic. Get vaccinated and wear a mask when it can protect you and others. Find a vaccine near you at myturn.ca.gov. Brought to you by the California Department of Public Health.
Kfi Am 640.
Yes, I know. I have a calming demeanor. You know, when it's your job, basically, to push people beyond their comfort zones, it's good to make them feel as safe as possible. Like an open-heart surgeon for your home. You'll do fine. No worries. We got it.
Home with Dean Sharp. The House Whisperer this morning at 9 on Kfi Am 640.
More stimulating talk.
This is KFI AM 640. I'm Oscar Ramirez, and you're listening to the Daily Dive Weekend Edition. Here's an interesting way to look at COVID numbers. Throughout the pandemic, we've looked at three numbers to track how bad things are getting: case counts, hospitalizations, and deaths. Hospitalizations in particular have been a key figure in assessing the severity of illness, but a new study suggests that almost half of those hospitalized have mild or asymptomatic symptoms. While some patients are admitted for serious illness, some are there unrelated to COVID and later test positive, but they're still counted toward the overall hospital numbers. For a closer look at COVID hospitalizations, we'll speak to David Zweig, contributor to The Atlantic.
For much of the pandemic, we look at deaths as one measure of what's happening, and of course, deaths are accurate as far as there's a finality to them. However, they are a lagging indicator, and of course, they also don't account for people who were severely sick and recovered. That's still something we want to measure. Conversely, cases are very dependent upon who is tested, when they're tested, what types of people, is it really an accurate sample or not. So that's also not a great measure. So hospitals ostensibly have been a really good measure for where we are in either as a country or in an individual region as far as what the degree of problem is with the pandemic. But what I found, there's a new study that just came out, and I should mention it is in preprint, which means it hasn't been peer-reviewed yet. However, the study was of a really, really large sample size. It was done in the VA, the Veterans Administration, and it was nearly 50,000 hospital admissions in the VA. And what they found was that nearly half of all admissions that are coded as COVID hospital admission were actually for mild or even asymptomatic cases. And your listeners may be wondering, well, how is that possible? Why would people be in the hospital if they were asymptomatic? So, not to leave too much of a cliffhanger for you there. So, and the answer is that there are a lot of people who go to the hospital for any number of things in a normal time, whether maybe there's trauma from a car accident, you could break your ankle, you have appendicitis, whatever. But most hospitals in the country test every single person who is admitted for COVID. It's a policy. So you could arrive at the hospital for something else, and you get tested, and then it turns out that you have COVID. So what the researchers found was that a significant portion of the COVID hospitalizations were for people like that, or secondarily for people who did arrive with COVID symptoms, but they were mild, and they decided to admit these people anyway because maybe it was someone who had some underlying conditions, and they just wanted to play it safe, or the patient complained of subjectively feeling short of breath, for example. But then those people never progressed into a serious illness.
And that's totally interesting, and you don't really think of it when you're hearing coverage of, hospitalizations and how the numbers are up and all that. You just kind of assume that, oh, wow, if you're in the hospital, those people must be really sick. But you're right, there's a range of treatments, a range of issues of why people might be there. On the severe side, you got to be intubated or something. You might need supplemental oxygen. It could be as simple as getting that steroid that everybody, has been proven to help out, the dexamethasone. So there's a range, and when we're hearing a lot about coverage, we're not really hearing the differentiation between how severe it could be.
That's right. And what I would urge your listeners to think through is that, so the next time you hear about COVID hospitalization numbers, be aware that according to this study, and by the way, I should mention, I also wrote an article for New York Magazine a few months back of two separate studies which were peer-reviewed, and they were published by a journal put out by the American Academy of Pediatrics, and their findings echoed the findings in this study, and the pediatric population was 40 to 45% of those hospitalizations were also found to be incidental. Again, meaning someone arrives at the hospital for something totally unrelated to COVID, then they are tested for COVID, and then if they get, a box gets checked off, that's a COVID hospitalization. So this isn't to minimize and say that there aren't people who are very sick with COVID. That's real. It's a real thing, and it's happening. But the numbers that we hear are not necessarily what many people would think that they are.
And that's always been one of those difficulties throughout the pandemic is, how bad really is it? A lot of it is very individualized. And if the COVID-19 affects everybody so differently, and we have this wide spectrum of it, so it's always that curiosity, well, how bad is it? And we hear, headlines. There's one from NBC News. More kids are hospitalized with COVID, but researchers aren't sure if they're sicker too. We're seeing things, related to the hospital resources that we have. Idaho declared a statewide hospital resource crisis amid the latest surge. They're having to ration care right now and turn people away. And I read through one of these recent articles. Nowhere does it really say how many people that are admitted are really that bad. And I'm sure there are some, because that's what we've been seeing. But yeah, that kind of gets lost in there. How bad are some of these COVID patients?
I think a really important point that people, need to understand is right, is how these things are measured and what these different things we hear mean. So it's not that they are doing this, trying to trick people. The reason that everyone is coded as a COVID hospitalization is simply because they test positive. It's because that's how hospitals need to treat those patients differently, perhaps isolate them in different ways. And similarly, the government uses this to track, the spread of the disease. But the thing that most people interpret hospitalizations to mean, including the media, sort of give the impression, is that it's not just about the spread of the disease, but hospitalizations as an indicator of severity. And that's what this particular study, and also those studies that I mentioned on the pediatric admissions, that's what's so important about this, is that hospitalizations can be used as a measure of the spread of the disease, but they shouldn't necessarily be used as a measure of severity of the disease, because again, they're finding that half of them is incidental. One really interesting point that the study found was that prior to January of this year, the number was roughly 1/3 of the patients were incidental or mild course of illness, and then that number bumped up to a half after vaccines became readily available. And in fact, they found that people who are vaccinated had an even higher, something like 57%, were in this mild or incidental category. So this is really strong evidence that the vaccines are helping, that even if you are vaccinated, even if you show up at the hospital, your chances of your course of illness being mild are much higher.
And that's one of the messages that, public health experts have been trying to get across so much, is that, the vaccines do help reduce the risk of having severe illness. Now, to be fair, a lot of this study was done before the Delta variant became a little more widespread. I still feel it probably tracks the same way, but because, all reports say that the vaccines do protect against Delta as well. But a lot of these numbers do come before that rise really took hold.
You're right. However, the study did run through the very end of June, and the researchers specifically looked at this point, and they mentioned that toward the end of June, when Delta, was starting to take hold, they did not notice any difference in the sort of trajectory of these metrics. So that is good news as far as there's no indication that anything would change with Delta. We know that Delta is more contagious, but there doesn't appear to be any evidence that it is more virulent, meaning that it's more dangerous to any individual person should they become infected.
Well, I hope that we start to look into a little bit more of these numbers and track these types of numbers and how severe that is. David Zweig, contributor to The Atlantic and New York Magazine, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're listening to the Daily Dive Weekend Edition on KFI AM 640 and everywhere in the iHeartRadio app. I'll be back with some more top stories from the week, but first, let's get an update from the KFI newsroom.
KFI News on the hour, on the half, and when it breaks.
I'm Brian Bruman from the KFI 24-hour newsroom. The FBI is looking for a couple from Tarzana who ditched their tracking bracelets and took off while awaiting sentencing for stealing millions in COVID pandemic relief funds. The couple was found guilty in June of submitting fraudulent loan applications and getting more than $18 million in Paycheck Protection and Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program money, then using it to buy luxury homes, a Harley, gold coins, diamonds, and luxury watches. The FBI is offering a $20,000 reward for help in finding the couple. The Chargers are getting ready to host the Cowboys in their first regular season home game with fans in the stands. Quarterback Justin Herbert threw for 337 yards, a touchdown, and an interception last weekend against Washington. Kickoff starts at SoFi Stadium this afternoon at 1:25. SoCal weather from KFI brought to you by Indeed.com. Highs in the mid-60s to low 70s at the beaches, mid-70s to low 80s in Metro LA and OC, upper 70s to mid-80s in the inland valleys, and low to upper 80s in the Inland Empire. We lead local from the KFI 24-hour newsroom. I'm Brian Bruman.
Well, unfortunately, this is a fatal crash investigation now in Pomona. 10 freeway westbound side just past the 57. They have all lanes shut down, and they are diverting traffic onto the 57 in either direction. You're seeing the backup there for the 10 westbound as you're coming away from Fairplex. Now, you can use Fairplex instead of taking the 57, but they are diverting traffic off of the freeway there to the 57 in either direction. Still working on the cleanup on the northbound side of the 5 at Anaheim at Catella. They've got 2 right lanes blocked off. KFI in the Sky helps get you there faster. I'm Rebecca Campbell.
Hitting speed bumps in your hiring process? Streamline your route to hired with Indeed. Their hiring platform makes it easy to attract, screen, and interview candidates, all in the same place. Find your next great hired and visit Indeed.com/credit.
AMCO presents Bet You Didn't Know.
Bet you didn't know that your car's transmission is made up of 800 pieces. Also, bet you didn't know that AMCO's fixed over 40 million transmissions, and that AMCO offers a nationwide warranty.
And AMCO offers payment plan options for almost any credit situation. So it's easier than ever to fix it fast and pay it off slow. That's AMCO, AA-MCO.
On the new documentary-style podcast, Was I in a Cult? You'll hear the fascinating real-life stories from cult survivors who got in and, most importantly, got back out again.
Why are we all so obsessed with cults?
Well, because it could happen to anyone.
Perhaps you too will be asking yourself, wait, was I in a cult?
Listen to Was I in a Cult on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts. Brought to you by DuckDuckGo. Protect your privacy online for free with DuckDuckGo.
Want to get away? Discover Catalina Island, where you can stay close but feel far. For a limited time, stay 2 nights at any Catalina Island Company property and get your 3rd night complimentary. Book your next vacation at visitCatalinaIsland.com. That's visitCatalinaIsland.com.
Alzheimer's disease is a national crisis. More than 6 million Americans are living with the diagnosis. Alzheimer's Los Angeles provides people living with the disease and their caregivers free support and services to make their life a little easier. Learn more at alzheimersla.org.
That's Cars for the Cat. Pick up is quick and easy. You'll also get a vacation voucher and a tax deduction.
Also accepting real estate donations.
Live and local.
KFI AM 640.
An iHeart radio station.
This is KFI AM 640, heard everywhere in the iHeartRadio app. I'm Oscar Ramirez, and you're listening to the Daily Dive Weekend Edition. We're hearing a lot about more vaccine mandates coming to workplaces and offices, including one from the Biden administration on companies with more than 100 employees. But for now, many places are just operating on the honor system, where health information is given voluntarily. But this is making some employees feel nervous because they're not sure if everyone is following the rules. For a look at how businesses are handling mandates so far, we'll speak to Ray Smith, lifestyle reporter at the Wall Street Journal.
What we're seeing is a lot of companies relying on the honor system rather than mandating vaccines or masks. And in a way, the companies are sort of trusting their employees to be adults and responsible and honest. And the issue is that, while some employees will be all those things, there are other employees, quite frankly, who will lie because they want to get into the cafeteria, or they won't because, if they say they're unvaccinated, they won't be able to eat there or something like that, or they'll be left out in general. And so as much as we want to believe that the people we work with in offices are on the same page as us and are going to be honest and upfront, it's just not the case. And so that has a lot of employees really nervous just about whether or not their colleagues are being honest about their status or whether they're going to volunteer that. And it's one of those things that it's really kind of uncomfortable and awkward to ask your colleagues about. I mean, unless it comes up in a voluntary conversation, you don't want to go around asking your coworkers, hey, are you vaccinated? And even if you do, who knows if they're going to tell you the truth or not? So it's creating this really fraught environment for people who are already at the office or people who've gotten these announcements that we're operating on an honor system, and now they're wondering whether they want to go into an office like that where they're just not sure.
Yeah, and it's a weird balance for employers as well. They don't want to alienate the workers that maybe choose to not be vaccinated, but it's tough for them. They don't want to enforce a mandate, right? They don't want them to quit over things like that too, because depending on the industry, it might be hard to replenish that workforce.
Exactly. The employers are in sort of a tough spot because it's a tight labor market, and they know that they could potentially alienate some people if they require. In rare cases, they can also face lawsuits if they require mandates such as masks or vaccines. But the other thing is that because it has gotten also so political in some cases, whether to get vaccinated or not, or wear masks or not, some companies just don't want the drama of all that. They just want to sort of play neutral in a way and encourage rather than mandate. We saw President Biden announce some plans to make employers with more than, I think it's 100 employees or more than that, make them get their employees vaccinated or they're tested. But the issue really is that we don't know how long it's going to take to get implemented. And in the meantime, a lot of companies and employees are in this limbo where they're being asked to come into the office under this honor system.
Yeah, and you made mention in your article too, after President Biden announced that, trending on Twitter, right away it started, I will not comply. A lot of people that don't want to have to go through all of this. And so what we're seeing in the public too is kind of different also. Obviously there's millions of people that don't want to be vaccinated, they don't want to wear masks, all that. But when they do some of these surveys of people's, whether in office work or other industries, the majority of people that answer at least those polls say that they do want their employers to mandate vaccines and mask wearing.
It's really interesting when you think about the fact that this is what their employees are asking for. Their employees basically are saying, we don't mind, we actually want this, mandate it.
Yeah, a peace of mind type of thing.
Yes, peace of mind. And also, some of the people that I talked to for the story, some of the employees, they were really hopeful that the higher-ups in general were listening, or because they just felt like this is what employees are asking you to do, and you should listen to your employees, because, we talked about retention earlier. On the flip side of that, I talked to one woman who actually quit her job when she learned that they had an honor system, and when they set their office return date, she filed her notice when she saw that memo. And so you're at risk of losing people if you don't have mandates in place because people do not trust the honor system. That's another issue with employees. And I think employers probably will have to listen to employees in some cases, if there's enough of a groundswell. Or one employee told me, the employee that I talked to from JP Morgan told me that a lot of people just chose not to come in, just to stay working from home if they could, if the department could, because they did not trust the honor system. And so what you're going to have in some cases in companies is, if you have this honor system out there and you have a voluntary return policy, you may find a lot of employees not coming in, just choosing to stay working from home instead.
Yeah, definitely. And in that example that you gave of the woman who quit, she quickly found another job where she could work from home, but the other effect, right? She had to take about a 15% pay cut. So, just for that luxury, let's say, of being able to work from home. So it impacts you in a bunch of different ways. Now that President Biden has mandated that rule, as you mentioned, it's going to take time to implement. So we'll see what happens there. But across the board, it does seem like employees want clear rules. Maybe we'll get there with that. But, for now, the honor system, I know, still makes a lot of people uncomfortable. So we'll see how all of that develops. Ray Smith, lifestyle reporter at the Wall Street Journal, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
This week we also saw the first trial in the Varsity Blues college admissions cheating scandal kick off. There have been 57 individuals that have been charged so far, and 46 of them have pled guilty or will plead guilty, so just a handful are going to court. In this trial, we'll see a former casino executive who paid $300,000 to get his daughter into USC, and a private equity investor who paid over $1 million to get his kids into college. For more on how opening arguments went this week, we'll speak to Melissa Korn, higher education reporter at the Wall Street Journal.
So we had day one today, which was pretty exciting. We've been waiting for this for about 2.5 years. The trial got pushed back quite a bit. So we have two parents on trial right now, and their defense attorneys and the prosecutors set forth two very different versions of what these payments were all about, whether it was a quid pro quo, a bribe to Rick Singer, this college counselor, and university coaches and others, or it was, a legitimate donation and these families were just being generous and maybe it would help their kids, but there was no sure guarantee.
So we have Gamal Abdelaziz. He's a former Wynn Resorts executive. I think he paid $300,000 to help get his daughter into USC as a basketball recruit. And then we have John Wilson. He's a private equity investor. He had a few kids that Rick Singer helped him. I think he paid over $1 million for these arrangements.
John Wilson worked with Rick Singer for a son who got into USC and then for his twin daughters a few years later.
So obviously, we've heard all the stories and how they paid exorbitant amount of sums. I think overall it was about $25 million that Rick Singer funneled through one of his charities or something to help get all of this stuff done. So how did opening arguments go? What is the defense, what kind of angle were they trying to work with all of this?
The defense lawyers, who are former federal prosecutors, they're kind of top of their game folks, these people aren't messing around with who they got as their lawyers. They tried to frame it as their clients being duped by a con man, that Rick Singer stole money from them, that he was a smooth talker who bamboozled them and manipulated them. They didn't quite understand the extent of the scheme. They didn't know that they were allegedly part of this alleged conspiracy. They were taken advantage of, and that they didn't even know about these fake athletic profiles that Singer's team created for many clients. That's a big part of their argument. They're also trying to make clear that Rick Singer is a liar and a con man, and it's hard to trust whatever he says. He's not going to be speaking at the trial, but there's a bunch of audio recordings, which we started to get to hear today. We've seen some transcripts, but here we're listening to these conversations between Rick Singer and clients, which is pretty exciting to hear.
And on that note, the reason why we have those recordings is because Rick Singer started cooperating with the authorities once he saw everything was going down. So he was recording conversations that he was having with certain parents. That's where this audio is coming from, which is, like you said, exciting to hear because we get to hear it from them. One of the things that you mentioned in one of your articles that defense might be doing is defense known as pure legal impossibility, this tactic that they want to use. How would that figure into this?
The defense attorneys are trying a number of tactics, or they hinted at a number of tactics. So this one, the pure legal impossibility, essentially means that this alleged fraud wasn't illegal because these payments, even if they were intended as bribes, didn't deprive USC of the honest work of its employees. Essentially, these payments were fulfilling what these USC employees thought was their duty, to fundraise for the school. And that's a big part of the defense, that argument that USC was, as one of the lawyers put it today, a fundraising machine. Fundraising was just so core to the jobs of everybody there that they weren't making USC the victim here. They were raising money for USC.
You're listening to the Daily Dive Weekend Edition on KFI AM 640. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation about the first trial in the college admissions cheating scandal.
Most mortgage lenders charge a fee, sometimes up to 1.5 points for pulling cash out of your home's equity. Those points are on your whole loan balance, not just the cash you get. For example, if your loan amount is $400,000, that's a $6,000 fee. For a limited time, Owning will waive this fee so qualified borrowers can get a cash-out refi with absolutely no closing costs of any kind. Besides the usual no title, escrow, appraisal, etc., no fees for a cash-out on a 30-year fixed mortgage. So if you're in process somewhere and paying fees, call 8332-OWNING or go to owning.com, where our rate in APR for a no cash-out fee 30-year fixed mortgage is 2.75%. But hurry, the mortgage industry won't like this. So who knows when this special goes away? Call 8332-OWNING or go to owning.com.
NMLS 2611, licensed by the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation and the California Residential Mortgage Lending Act. Subject to credit approval. Call 833-303-2160 for terms and conditions. Equal housing lender.
As a Hall of Fame running back, Eric Dickerson knows the winner when he sees one.
That's right. The all-new, all-electric F-150 Lightning is truly unbeatable.
That's because it comes with a Pro Power onboard generator that can power your home, your job site, or your next big tailgate.
Sounds like another winner by Ford F-Series.
You heard it here first. Reserve your 2022 Ford F-150 Lightning today at buyfordnow.com.
And visit your Southern California Ford dealers. Tell them ED sent you.
Call strike three! The Dodgers win! Champions of 2020! The image of Julio Urias' reaction after the final out of the 2020 World Series is one that Dodger fans won't soon forget. And now's your chance to have a memory of that celebration immortalized in your bobblehead collection. Be at Dodger Stadium on Tuesday, September 28th, when the Dodgers take on the Padres, and the first 40,000 fans in attendance will receive a Julio Urias bobblehead presented by Security Benefit. For tickets, visit Dodgers.com/promotion.
This is my business. I started it, and my hard work made it successful. We survived the last year, and things are starting to look better, but now hard work alone isn't enough. I need cash to hire some people and buy supplies. Loan Me Business is for people like you. We can loan your business from $6,000 up to $250,000. And we understand that you don't need the cash soon, you need it now. And if your credit isn't perfect, that's okay. Apply today and you can have the money in your account tomorrow. Loan Me Business loans have longer terms, keeping your monthly payments low and manageable. You can even pay the loan off early to control your costs with no prepayment penalties. That sounds great. Simply go to loanmebiz.com to get started. That's loanmebiz.com or call 844-3-LOAN-ME.
Not all applicants will qualify. Approval and terms subject to credit standards. See loanme.com for details. Loans made pursuant to California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation Law License 603K061.
That's 844-3-LOAN-ME or loanmebiz.com.
iHeartRadio brings you Global Citizen Live, a moment heard around the world. This Saturday, the biggest artists on the planet unite with world leaders to demand action on our biggest challenges. Featuring BTS, Usher, Elton John, Black Eyed Peas, Ed Sheeran, Lizzo, Shawn Mendes, Jennifer Lopez, Coldplay, and other surprise guests. Join us for this once-in-a-generation moment to defend the planet and defeat poverty. Together, we can move the world one action at a time. Hear it all day this Saturday on Global Citizen Radio with the iHeartRadio app.
Portions of the following program were pre-recorded.
What punishment would you exact on an 8- and 5-year-old who disobeyed you?
No more playing in the woods. They'll play in the house on an iPad. That's what they'll do. You want nature? No. You don't get any nature.
There's an app for that.
Jerry and Shannon.
Yeah.
Weekdays at 10 a.m. on KFI.
I have a sign in my office. Is Diet Pepsi okay? And the answer is Monopoly money okay?
Bill Handle. Mornings from 6 to 10 on KFI.
I know the weight of the world seems to rest on your shoulders, and sometimes life seems like it's filled only with confusion and chaos. But I assure you, I have a plan for you.
The Jesus Christ Show. This morning at 6 on KFI AM 640.
More stimulating talk.
This is KFI AM 640, heard everywhere in the iHeartRadio app. I'm Oscar Ramirez, and you're listening to the Daily Dive Weekend Edition. As I mentioned earlier, 46 defendants have already pled or agreed to plead guilty. They're over here trying to fight it. They're high-profile businessmen, and they're saying that they got duped. Other people already pled guilty to this. How does that figure into it? And then the prosecution, how did their opening arguments go?
There's some limit to what the prosecutors can bring in regarding the other parents. But part of their argument is that this was a conspiracy, and it doesn't matter if these guys knew the others who pleaded guilty. They were all part of the same scheme. So one of those people who pleaded guilty, Bruce Isaacson, agreed to cooperate with prosecutors, and he testified today. He was the government's first witness, and he'll be on the stand again tomorrow. But, the prosecutors are trying to lay this out as this absolutely was a conspiracy. The parents didn't necessarily run it and make every decision, but they were involved in it, and they knew about it, and they can't proclaim ignorance or innocence there. The prosecutors also today tried to kind of get out ahead of one of the defense arguments about Rick Singer, and an assistant U.S. attorney making the opening statement said that, yes, Rick Singer's a liar. He told people lots of falsehoods. He even kind of messed around after he was caught by the feds and lied to them and deleted text messages. Like, he's not a Boy Scout, but he was very clear about one thing. He was very clear about what the payments were being used for. And that's the prosecutor saying that just saying that Rick Singer was a liar and a con man isn't enough of a defense. So we'll see, obviously, if the jury buys that.
Well, it's going to be interesting. Obviously, we've been following this, like you said, for 2.5 years since this all came out. And we've learned a lot. We're going to learn a lot more through this trial, so all of that's going to be definitely interesting. How long is this expected to last?
So this trial is expected to last about a month. And then in November, we've got a couple of coaches and former athletic administrator at USC who are scheduled for trial. And then in January, we've got 3 more parents.
Wow.
So
Okay.
this is going to keep going on for a while.
Yeah, definitely. Melissa Korn, higher education reporter at the Wall Street Journal and co-author of Unacceptable, Privilege, Deceit, and the Making of the College Admission Scandal. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Finally for this week, a little more health news. We've heard for a long time that sitting for prolonged periods of time can be very harmful to your health, contributing to high blood sugar, high cholesterol, and messing with your metabolic health. But to counter the ill effects of sitting for too long, a new study says that moving for 3 minutes every 30 minutes can be very helpful. Even just walking 15 steps improved the blood sugar of workers in this study. For more on what to know about this, we'll speak to Gretchen Reynolds, phys ed columnist at the New York Times.
One of the things this study actually wanted to do is see if, in fact, that is doable, because there has been quite a bit of research into how to break up sitting time, because, as you said, we know it's not good for us. It contributes to risks for diabetes and heart disease and all kinds of things. So there have been a lot of lab studies of how often should people rise to reduce their blood sugar and so on. But they were in the laboratory, and that's not an office. It's not our home. It's not realistic. And they also often lasted a day. So the people and the researchers in this study wanted to set up an experiment in a workplace that involved real people, and they would really try and set the parameters of what is realistic in terms of getting up and moving. What would be possible that would actually show results and wouldn't totally annoy every other coworker or your spouse if you're at home. And so they thought that it would probably be 30 minutes, because that's often what showed up in the laboratory studies. So they gave half of a group of people, office workers with sedentary jobs, they gave half of them a phone app that alerted them every half hour and said, time to stand up, basically. And then they had the people for 3 minutes do something, because there's also research that shows that just standing still, just standing up is probably not enough for our health. So they had them either walk, and they had to walk at least 15 steps in order for the app to count it as an activity break. They could walk, they could go up and down stairs. They suggested they do like very light calisthenics, hop in place, do a couple of squats, something like that. But do that every half an hour. And what they found was that people did do it. And this experiment lasted for 3 weeks. It was in Stockholm, Sweden, so I should also say that. These were Swedish people.
And the other thing, too, which I appreciated, right, is they picked middle-aged people, as you mentioned, workers in an office setting, people that were high risk for type 2 diabetes. So these are people that would be most affected by, like, a prolonged life of sitting and everything. You know, they're already kind of on the cusp, let's say. So doing it with them, which I feel like a lot of people in this country might be close to, right? It just feels like that's hitting the point even better.
Exactly. They really wanted to look at who are the people most at risk of sitting all the time. And all of us are, but people who already have some metabolic issues, in this case, they had some insulin resistance, all of these things that could progress to type 2 diabetes, which is severe. You don't want that. And so, again, they did this for 3 weeks. And by and large, compliance was pretty good. The scientists said that people didn't mind getting up for 3 minutes. Some of them didn't do the whole 3 minutes. They might take the 15 steps and quit. But by and large, people said this fit into their work life. If they worked in a cubicle, they could just, do some wall squats, walk in place, something. If they were working at home, they could just walk around the living room. And so they did, for the most part, comply pretty well. And at the end of 3 weeks, they showed results. Compared to the control group, the group that didn't do anything, they did have somewhat better blood sugar control, especially in the morning, which is actually important because it looks like having really high blood sugar overnight is particularly unhealthy. And so their blood sugar overnight appears to be better regulated, and they had far fewer of the sort of spikes and dips that can be very dangerous in terms of blood sugar control. And this is the only change they made. They didn't change their diet. They didn't start exercising, unless you count this as exercise.
But
they did.
It's surprising how much it helps, just a little bit of change and a little bit of movement really comes through. And one of the interesting things, too, with all of this is, you mentioned in the article, you can blame the muscles in your legs. That's why it's important to get up and move or do the squats, whatever it could be. But it's the lower half of your body that really affects the entire body when you're sitting for too long or just being sedentary.
Those are huge muscles, and usually even if you're standing up, if you're walking, they're contracting a lot, and that means they need fuel. They're slurping blood sugar out of your bloodstream. They're making sure that your blood levels stay level. If you're just sitting, none of that happens. The muscles also, when they contract, they release certain enzymes that help to break down cholesterol in your bloodstream. So if that's not happening, you get heightened amounts of cholesterol. And that can happen in people who are perfectly healthy. So people who already have some metabolic issues, it really exacerbates it to sit for a long time. So for all of us, I think the lesson of this study is, healthy or not, young or old, try and get up at least every half an hour and move around for a few minutes. It really can make a difference in your health.
And these studies are showing that it can be done fairly easily, right? 3 minutes every half hour, right? Get up and go to the bathroom, take the long way around, take the steps. Those little tiny things really help so much.
And again, not everyone was even making it through 3 minutes. So take 15 steps, and that's something. Just get up and move in whatever way is convenient for you.
Gretchen Reynolds, phys ed columnist at the New York Times, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the Daily Dive Weekend Edition. You can catch a fresh episode of the podcast every morning, Monday through Friday on iHeartRadio. You can also follow us on social media at Daily Dive Pod on both Twitter and Instagram.